Welcome, residents and colleagues, to this explainer. Today, I'm putting on my program director hat because we're going to take some of that abstract optical physics and transform it into concrete, clinical mastery for your OCAP exams and honestly, for your daily practice. We aren't just memorizing formulas today. No, we're going to master the biological realities of the near point and the golden rules of prescribing. By the time we finish, you'll intimately understand exactly how to manipulate optical space to restore a patient's entire visual world. Let's get into it. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the foundation. Second, case 1, the myope. Third, case 2, the hyperope. Fourth, calculating spectacles. And finally, an OKA pearl on overplussing. Let's start building that intuition.
Section 1, the foundation, defining our range. Before we can treat a patient, we really have to understand how the healthy eye focuses in optical space. Okay, so as a baseline, the far point is the point in optical space that's conjugate to the retina when the eye is completely at rest. Biologically, what does this mean? It means the ciliary muscle is totally relaxed, the zonules are pulled tight, and the crystalline lens is at its absolute flattest. I like to think of the far point as the eye in a coma, just absolute baseline resting state with zero accommodative effort. Literally, this is the absolute outer limit of the patient's clear vision.
Conversely, the near point is the point in space conjugate to the retina when the eye is fully accommodated. Here, that ciliary muscle is maximally contracted and the zonules are fully relaxed. So if the far point is a coma, the near point is a dead sprint. The lens bulges forward to exert its maximum converging power, and this represents the absolute closest boundary of clear vision.
And this brilliantly illustrates that the physical distance between these two functional boundaries, from zero effort all the way to 100% effort, is exactly what we call the patient's accommodated range. This physical distance is a super high-yield concept you absolutely must understand for the boards. It's not just some abstract zone on a whiteboard. This is the patient's entire functional visual world when they aren't wearing their glasses. Moving on to Section 2, Case 1, the myope. Let's connect this physiology directly to a clinical presentation.
Now here's a classic board-style setup for you. If a patient is a -2 diopter myope with 5 diopters of maximal accommodation, what is her uncorrected clear vision range? I want you to mentally pause for a second and think about this. How does her built-in myopic error, her excessively powerful eye, interact with her physical accommodative effort to actually define her visual world? Where exactly can she see clearly?
All right, let's break down the clinical reasoning step by step. Don't just blindly memorize the steps here. Think about the physics. Her eye is already too powerful, right? It's acting like a built-in magnifying glass. First, her -2 diopter error acts like a built-in plus lens. Using our standard formula of 100 divided by diopters, her far point is set at exactly 50 centimeters anterior to the cornea. Now, when she maximally accommodates, she adds her 5 diopters of ciliary muscle effort to that built-in 2 diopters of myopia. That gives her a massive total of 7 diopters of converging power. And dividing 100 by 7 is going to give us her near point.
That math lands us right at 14 centimeters. Notice how that massive 7 diopters of total power violently pulls her near point right up to her nose.
Think about the clinical reality of that for a moment. Without her distance correction, this patient's entire functional visual world exists strictly in a tiny, tight little box between roughly 5 inches and 18 inches from her face. Anything beyond half a meter is entirely a blur. This perfectly highlights why myopes function so incredibly well for near tasks, but are severely disabled at a distance. Just imagine walking through the world where everything beyond your outstretched hand is completely out of focus.
All right, Section 3, Case 2, the hyperope. This one introduces a truly fascinating physiological deficit.
Let's consider a totally different patient. She's a +5 diopter hyperope. Her far point is theoretically floating in space 20 centimeters behind her cornea. Now here is where residents routinely get tripped up on oral boards. Where is her uncorrected near point? How does she use her 6 diopters of natural accommodation just to function in her daily life? Now, what's really interesting here is the concept of the hyperopic tax. I want you to burn this concept into your brain for the boards. Because her eye is underpowered, effectively having a -5 diopter error lens built into it, she has to pay a 5 diopter tax just to look at the horizon. She's actively burning 5 of her 6 available diopters of accommodation just to see clearly at infinity. She's working hard just to exist. This leaves her with a mere 1 diopter of reserve for near vision. Using our math, 100 divided by 1 diopter pushes her near point all the way out to a full meter away. Without glasses, she literally cannot see anything clearly closer than arm's length. Section 4. Calculating spectacles. It's time for clinical intervention.
Here is where the physics actually meets the refraction lane. Her biological far point is 20 centimeters behind the eye, but our glasses don't sit on the cornea, do they? They sit on the nose. And remember, any prescription over 4 diopters requires a vertex calculation on your written exams. So how do we account for this physical gap between the spectacle lens and the eye to accurately land that focal point exactly on the retina?
Well, we have to calculate the secondary focal length of the corrective lens. Imagine physically pushing the focal point forward. We take that 20 centimeter far point located behind the eye, and we literally add the 1.5 centimeter physical vertex distance in front of the eye. This means our lens needs a focal length of exactly 21.5 centimeters. To convert that to dioptric power, we simply divide 100 by our new 21.5 centimeter focal length. This precise vertex math gives us a required corrective spectacle lens power of plus 4.65 diopters. That is the exact mathematical answer. But as we know in medicine, math doesn't always equal to correct clinical action.
Look at the incredible clinical impact of providing that correction. Once fully corrected for distance, her ciliary muscle can finally just relax. She now has 0 diopters of accommodative demand at distance. Because we used glasses to pay her hyperopic tax, she completely reclaims her entire 6 diopters of reserve. Her near point immediately shrinks from a full meter away, coming all the way into a highly functional 17 centimeters. You haven't just given her glasses, you've fully restored her visual world.
Section 5, OCAP Pearl, never overplus. Let's translate all this math into a high-yield clinical safety rule. Here is a classic board trap. We calculated plus 4.65 diopters, but standard phoropters and lens grinders work in quarter diopter steps. Mathematically, 4.65 is closer to 4.75 than it is to 4.50. So why is rounding up to plus 4.75 an automatic failure on an oral board scenario? Seriously, think about the anatomy here.
The problem is that giving a plus 4.75 diopter lens overpluses the eye. This means the spectacle lens is simply too strong. Instead of placing the focal point perfectly on the retina, that extra plus power drops the image straight into the vitreous fluid, essentially pulling it too far forward.
So the crucial point here is the biological asymmetry of the eye. You need to remember this clinical mantra. Minus is fine, but plus is a fuss. If you underplus the patient with a plus 4.50 lens, the image lands just slightly behind the retina. The eye can effortlessly accommodate to pull an underplussed image forward onto the fovea. But if you overplus them with a 4.75 lens, the image is now in the vitreous. The ciliary muscle is already totally relaxed. It is anatomically impossible to accommodate backward to push an image deeper into the eye to fix an overplus lens. Therefore, your golden clinical rule for every hyperope you will ever refract is this: always err on the side of too little plus. Rounding down respects the biological reality that the eye can easily compensate for minus, but it is completely defenseless against excess plus. As we wrap up this explainer, let's do a rapid-fire mental check. Far point, 0 effort. Near point, max effort. Golden rule for hyperopes, never over plus. You're manipulating biology here, not just doing math. So here's my final provocative thought for you to take away. If a pseudophakic patient comes into your lane complaining of near blur after cataract surgery, how does the complete loss of their natural accommodative range change your vertex calculations for their reading glasses? Think about that before your next clinic day. See you next time.